Today on American Strangeness, a spectral voice, a brutal street thug, and the death spirit of the Emerald Isle stalked and disturbed a Long Island community in this true and harrowing tale of 19th century New York City. This is the story of the Blissville Banshee. Long Islanders, particularly those of Irish descent, were tormented in 1884 by a disembodied voice they attributed to a banshee, a wailing omen of death that had trailed them from their home country to New York City. What followed was a mystery, a manhunt, and a mire of tragedy revealing dark forces, both tangible and ethereal, at work in late 19th century America. Among Irish fairy folk, the banshee is the spirit of death, watching over families of historic lineage and persons gifted with music and song, said to be talents bestowed by the spirit race. Lady Jane Wilde, the mother of Oscar Wilde, wrote, "Sometimes the banshee assumes the form of some sweet-singing virgin of the family who died young and has been given the mission by the invisible powers to become the harbinger of coming doom to her mortal kindred. Or she may be seen at night as a shrouded woman, crouched beneath the trees, lamenting with veiled face, or flying past in the moonlight, crying bitterly, and the cry of this spirit is mournful beyond all other sounds on earth, and betokens certain death to some member of the family whenever it is heard in the silence of the night." The banshee even followed the old race across the ocean into distant lands, for space and time offer no hindrance to the mystic power which is selected and appointed to bear the prophecy of death to a family. Blissville, Laurel Hill, and the suburban hamlets of Long Island City, adjacent to Calvary Cemetery, were haunted in March 1884 by a perambulating sound resembling a human voice. At about 10 p.m. on Thursday, March 6th, James Flaherty, a wealthy florist of Blissville, was walking home from Laurel Hill. As he passed some unoccupied buildings on the road leading from Blissville to the Bohemian settlement on Thompson Avenue, he was startled by a loud soprano voice that cried, "Oh ho!" From the peculiar sound of the voice, if indeed it was a human voice, Flaherty thought it was a female in distress and entered the empty two-story frame house from which it emanated. This was a brave move on Flaherty's part, for the building was long reputed to be haunted. The house had been formerly occupied by the Gleason family, but had been untenanted for 3 years. A German resident had committed suicide in one of the neighboring homes a few years earlier, as had a man named Daly, owner of the nearby Windsor Hotel in Long Island City, 7 or 8 years prior. A neighborhood barn, the site of a murder some years earlier, was another candidate for spiritual activity. All in all, the area was spook central. The florist searched the house from cellar to garret, but did not discover the source. As he stood puzzled on the upper floor, he suddenly heard the noise again, coming from the vacant lot behind the house. From the window he saw nothing, and later admitted he was from that moment a little frightened. Flaherty headed home and told his family about the strange experience. His son, John, a strapping young man, seized his shotgun and summoned 10 of his peers from the neighborhood. Together, the determined group set off in pursuit of the strange creature. The group walked about a quarter of a mile when they heard the voice call out from the direction of Calvary Cemetery. The young men separated into pairs, splitting up as any foolish mortals would do in a horror movie, and searched the entire graveyard to no avail. At about 10 minutes to midnight, the voice grew faint and seemed to die out in the center of the sprawling cemetery. Unsuccessful at tracking the disembodied voice, the group returned to their respective homes. The next morning, Flaherty, his son, and the other posse members learned that other residents of the village had heard the weird sounds but were afraid to speak of them openly. The group spread the word to nearly all the young men residing in Blissville and Laurel Hill to be ready on Friday night to run down the banshee or ghost or whatever else it might be. At 9 p.m. on Friday, the party of over 100 met at the bar in Bradley's Hotel in Blissville, each man armed with a 6-shooter or shotgun. Flaherty told his account of the previous night, and the group decided to separate into 3 patrols, led by ex-Alderman Murray, Judge Patrick Cavanaugh, and James McWilliams, each taking a different route and meeting at a given point. Scarcely had they left the hotel when they heard "Oh ho" in the same house that Flaherty had previously explored. The vigilantes surrounded the house, finally selecting 10 of their number to go inside. Just as the search began, the voice called out from the cemetery fence. The entire party charged in that direction, but were just as unsuccessful as the smaller group that scoured the graveyard the previous evening. Discouraged and disheartened, they dispersed to their homes. On Saturday, a Brooklyn Eagle reporter visited Flaherty at his home to learn more about the invisible spook. "There is something very strange in this thing," Flaherty told the journalist. "I don't believe in ghosts or banshees, but I'm sure the voice I heard was not the voice of any living creature." Flaherty declined further comment and directed the reporter to other Blissville residents who had shared the same experience. Kavanaugh, Murray, Alderman White, and others backed up Flaherty's claims and asserted their belief that the voice belonged to no living being but a ghost. However, Kavanaugh revealed that when he first heard the soprano voice, he identified it as belonging to a barber from Laurel Hill, who was reputed to possess the strongest voice of any man on Long Island. But the barber himself was among the search party, so Kavanaugh ruled him out as the true identity of the Banshee. It should be noted that none of the reporters that covered this story and its fallout could agree on the barber's name, although he was consistently stated to be African American. The barber was variously named Jackson, Thomas Williams, Peter Johnson, Andrew Johnson, Roland S. Johnson, Rolland, and most commonly, Rollins Johnson. The 1880 U.S. federal census shows a Roland Johnson, Rowland, a 26-year-old black man and barber living on Grand Street in New York City, although it is unclear if this was the same individual. Another official on the search committee, Supervisor Joseph McLaughlin, also suspected the barber and cautioned him to discontinue the annoyance. Some citizens theorized that Johnson was a ventriloquist who was throwing his voice to bedevil the community. These accusations incensed Johnson, who threatened to brain the next man who pointed the finger at him. "I am no more the ghost than you are. I have been out of my house at night since the spook came around here," Johnson told the New York Sun. "I am afraid to be out after dark. You can say that Rollins Johnson is a gentleman's barber and no spook." "It must be an owl," Kavanaugh concluded. He claimed that he saw this owl in the old barn, large as a goose, with eyes as large as a dessert plate. The barn was checked Monday morning, but the owl was not present. The Brooklyn Eagle added, "No one believes the judge." "It's an owl, or Johnson the barber imitating an owl," conceded McLaughlin. "There are no such things as ghosts or banshees." Michael Powers, the sexton of St. Raphael's Church, admitted to hearing the voice, but stated it was unlucky to discuss it any further. John Hipple, assistant superintendent of Calvary Cemetery, fully corroborated Flaherty's story. A police officer named Fantry, who resided close to the cemetery, opined that it was just young men who were out gallivanting late at night. Nonetheless, the community was uneasy and the night watches continued. A local man who had emigrated from Ireland and refused to be named told the Brooklyn Eagle, "In the old country, when the Banshee came around, the handsomest looking girl in the neighborhood was sure to die within a period of 4 weeks. I don't mean to say that any of the young ladies in this village will die, God forbid it, but it doesn't look right to me." A number of locals agreed with the supernatural hypothesis. As reported by the Brooklyn Eagle, they have all seen a wee woman with fiery red hair curled down her back, who vanishes from sight into the old barn, and the old inhabitants say the figure is like the corpse of the woman who, they allege, was murdered in the building. That crime has always remained a mystery. Others think it is the spirit in distress of some person buried in Calvary, and still others think it is the spirit of Mrs. Collier, who was recently killed by arsenical poisoning. John Powers, proprietor of a hotel directly opposite St. Raphael's Church, said, "A few nights ago, when I was on my way home from the city hall, I met a little woman on the road back of the Debevoise homestead. I thought it was strange that a woman should be out alone at that hour of the night. I stopped when she passed me and said, 'Good evening.' She made no reply, and I passed on. Soon afterward, I turned around and she had disappeared. Where she could have gone to, I don't know. There are no houses or fences on the road, and she must have disappeared into the bowels of the earth." Blissville resident Thomas Culvert Jr. also ran into such a woman on Saturday night, but did not speak to her. She had red hair with long curls down her back. She seemed to be about 25 or 30 years old, but was only about 3 feet in height. I ran home as fast as I could. Both Powers and Culvert said the woman was dressed all in black, the latter man also noting her stony blue eyes and expression of deep melancholy. Patrick Hughes described an even weirder experience. "I was coming home late on Saturday night, and when about halfway from Hunter's Point, I saw a little man riding a pig across the lot, going in the direction of the waterworks. I didn't look behind me, and you can bet that I ain't out late anymore at night." The Vigilante Committee decided on stronger measures for Monday, March 10th. If the specter reappears tonight and vanishes into the rickety barn, fire will be applied to it, reported the Brooklyn Eagle. Lights are to be placed in the Gleason house. It is said that one light was left there last night, which was mysteriously extinguished, the smoke from the wick creating an odor of brimstone. Every man who passes halts to make the sign of the cross as a protection against the apparition. Perhaps tongue-in-cheek, the Brooklyn Eagle stated that a Protestant who joked the phantom was an escaped prisoner from purgatory narrowly escaped violence from insulted Catholics. Nevertheless, an Episcopalian minister offered to join a Catholic priest in reading prayers to banish the annoying spirit, although the priest regarded the affair humorously. There will be music in Blissville tonight, mused the Eagle. Another barber, August Hefner from Hunters Point, offered his services as a ghostbuster. I will bet any man in Blissville $5 that I can catch the ghost. I have seen a good many ghosts in Germany, and I know how to handle them. Hefner had arrived in Laurel Hill and Blissville on Sunday afternoon, only to be disappointed when the ghost hunt was called off due to a storm, but he promised to be on hand when the search resumed on Monday. That Monday, at 10 p.m., the Blissville ghost was finally treed. John Flaherty, whose father had investigated the strange voice, was on the way from Laurel Hill to his home in Blissville when he heard the familiar oh-ho's coming from behind a large tree a short distance in front of him. Flaherty quickly drew his pistol and ordered the Banshee to surrender or he would kill it dead. The phantom threw up its hands and exclaimed, "Don't shoot! I am the ghost." Squinting through the dark of night, Flaherty immediately recognized who stood before him. Johnson, the barber with a voice of gold. The young man demanded an explanation from the barber, who made light of the situation, and admitted he had quite enjoyed the bruise. Flaherty angrily thrashed the barber and made him pledge he would discontinue his midnight prowling around Laurel Hill and Blissville. Johnson acquiesced, and Flaherty sent him home. On Tuesday, a New York Times reporter caught up with Johnson and asked about his motive. The barber admitted he did it for fun. I didn't think I was going to scare anybody, but you can bet that I'll never holler again as long as my name is Rollins Johnson. As indicated earlier, Rollins might have been a misspelling by the reporter. A later New York Times report claimed that Johnson said he conducted his prank just to frighten the Irish, presumably playing on Banshee lore they had carried with them from Ireland. One unavoidable fact to mention here is that, while New York City has a long history as a melting pot, the prejudices of the era are evident when reviewing the news coverage surrounding the Blissville Banshee. While some of the articles treated Johnson respectfully, other stories quoted him in caricatured dialect, as well as with outdated racial terms. Irish accents were conveyed in similar fashion. Johnson, who apparently was a skilled ventriloquist, soon faced what he believed was retribution from indignant members of the community over his shenanigans. On March 15th, he filed a complaint with Judge Kavanaugh in Long Island City Court against John Powers, the Blissville hotel owner. Kavanaugh soon issued a warrant for Powers' arrest on charges of assaulting Johnson on the highway and threatening to kill him. I was on my way from Dutch Kills about 10 o'clock on Friday night, Johnson told the Brooklyn Eagle. I wasn't yelling or thinking about ghosts. I met Powers and a man named Blake. Powers ran at me and said, "I'll kill you." He then hit me and knocked me down, and when I was down, he kicked me. He pulled out his revolver and fired 2 shots, but he must not have intended to kill me, or he could have done so. I lost $2.75 out of my pocket, but I don't think Powers took it. He had no reason to hit me unless he was mad because I turned out to be the ghost. I ain't going to play ghost anymore, but I don't want to be knocked down every time I go on the street. Powers denied the charges and said he had accidentally stumbled against Johnson in the dark. He also told the New York Times that he did strike a black man who assaulted him while on his way home on Friday night. I did not know who it was, and I never saw Johnson. I fired 2 shots to frighten him. I did not intend to hurt him, and I intended that he should not hurt me. Powers was scheduled for trial on Monday, March 17th, but the outcome does not appear to have been reported. This story took an awful and tragic turn when, on August 18, 1884, Johnson drowned at Bowery Bay under suspicious circumstances. According to press accounts, Johnson and a group of white men headed out into the bay in a boat that morning. They became intoxicated and started horsing around when the boat suddenly overturned, causing Johnson to fall into the water and drown. A rumor began circulating that the other men in the boat with Johnson, John Schroeder, Beeman, whose first name was not given, Frank Beck, and John Farrell, were members of the notorious Dutch Kills gang. The Brooklyn Eagle reported that the men were heard to say that if they did not catch any fish, they would drown Johnson. Beeman, though, stated that the group was cutting up, in quotes, in the boat when it upset, causing the accident. A local man named James McDonald found Johnson's body in shallow water. He stated that the other men exerted no effort to recover Johnson's body and left the scene as soon as they reached the shore. Johnson's body was transported to Hunters Point Morgue, and the matter was scheduled for a coroner's inquest on Friday, August 22nd. Again, New York papers do not appear to have reported on the outcome. In the coverage of his death, Johnson was remembered as a well-known barber with a shop in Dutch Kills, as well as the Blissville Banshee. The Dutch Kills gang was feared in Long Island City during the late 1800s and early 1900s, allegedly committing burglaries, assaults, and murders. Victims included other gang members, citizens, and the police. The Beeman involved with Johnson's death was likely John Beeman, a young, 6 foot 1 inch tall, quote-unquote, tough of toughs in Dutch Kills. Beeman was reported to have committed several violent crimes throughout the 1880s, but routinely escaped justice. Among his alleged offenses were bludgeoning an old and inoffensive man, in quotes, named John Leffer to death with a bedpost during a drunken row in Dutch Kills on New Year's night, 1882. Brutally beating a young German mechanic, Gottlieb Clymer, nearly to death with a chair in his own Dutch Kills home on September 23, 1883, after a drunken Beeman and a companion chided the man for sawing wood in his yard on the Sabbath, and the man told them to mind their own business. How dare he? And along with another tough, assaulting a Chinese laundryman, who was called Ah Ting by the press, so ferociously in October 1886 that it looked like the victim had been dragged through a thrashing machine. Finally, in October 1887, justice succeeded in catching up with Beeman. Queens County Judge Cullen sentenced Beeman to 7 years in prison for, along with several other men, beating and robbing Max Halfman of his silver watch and chain as he walked home from a late summer picnic at Schuetzen Park. The young tough's criminal record as a frequent offender factored into his sentence. Justice in Queens County, however slow, is sure-footed and overtook yesterday John Beeman, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle reported on October 15, 1887. Things have changed in Queens County, and indictments are no longer pigeonholed or disposed of by mock trials, as used to be the case. A good many old offenders have come to judgment latterly, and Beeman is about the last of the men who were privileged to commit offenses and go scot-free. Unfortunately, Beeman and another inmate, arsonist Charles Rickett, escaped from Dannemora Prison in upstate New York, the site of another infamous double prison break by inmates Richard Matt and David Sweat in 2015, on the morning of October 11, 1890. The pair, part of a work detail that was making repairs to the warden's house, jumped from a second-story window and slipped away, not being missed until dinner time. Despite a $100 reward for each of the escaped convicts, no trace of them was found. Blissville, the second ward of Long Island City, was founded by Neziah Bliss, although it was considered less prosperous than surrounding areas at the turn of the 20th century. It was part of the old Dutch Kills section, a locality which had by then passed out of existence legally, only persisting in local tradition. Bliss developed Greenpoint and later purchased a large tract of land on the further side of Newtown Creek in Dutch Kills. Despite the ominous-sounding name, Kill is Dutch for little stream, referring to a tributary of Newtown Creek. I really can't say that. Newtown Creek, per the Dutch Kills Civic Association. According to the 1898 book Leslie's History of the Greater New York, the name Blissville was mournfully out of harmony with its appearance and actual residential conditions. By the mid-19th century, Blissville became a center for heavy industry such as glue factories, smelting and fat-rendering plants, refineries, and foundries. Many Irish laborers followed the work opportunities and settled in Blissville, per Brownstoner. Nearly 800,000 Irish immigrants had arrived in New York during the devastating potato famine that swept their home country from 1845 to 1852. They established working-class settlements all around Manhattan, including Long Island City and Queens, many finding work in labor-intensive jobs. Today, wrote Brick Underground, Blissville is a rough-hewn, mostly forgotten outpost of New York City. The aging section lies along the Long Island Expressway and is occupied by warehouses, auto repair shops, some factories, and a smattering of housing and storefronts. Calvary Cemetery, one of the historic haunts of the Blissville Banshee, stretches along the length of Greenpoint Avenue, a sea of green in an urban landscape. Established in 1848 to compensate for a shortage of burial ground in Manhattan, Calvary Cemetery has been expanded over the years to encompass 365 acres and has the largest number of interments of any cemetery in the United States. The Blissville Banshee remains part of local folklore, although it is generally conveyed without the greater historical context and human identity of the phantom. However, the case of the Blissville Banshee isn't fully solved with Johnson's admission to throwing his voice to prank his neighbors. It doesn't explain the reports that veer into high strangeness, such as the wee woman with fiery red hair, who appeared to vanish into thin air before various eyewitnesses, and the little man riding a pig. These accounts are more in line with fairy beings of Irish lore, much like the Banshee. Fairies have been said to ride a variety of steeds, including ponies, deer, and dried stalks of weeds magically transformed into flying horses. The 1884 reports suggest a contemporary belief in the manifestation, either through imagination or supernatural means, of fairy folk who had followed Irish immigrants across the Atlantic Ocean from the Emerald Isle to New York City. Strangely, the tale of the Blissville Banshee has striking parallels to a story collected and presented by Lady Wilde in her 1887 book, Ancient Legends, Mystic Charms, and Superstitions of Ireland. It also tells of a banshee who followed Irish immigrants to the New World. As her story goes, a branch of the ancient race of the O'Grady's had settled in Canada, far removed, apparently, from all the associations, traditions, and mysterious influences of the old land of their forefathers. But one night, a strange and mournful lamentation was heard outside the house. No word was uttered, only a bitter cry, as of one in deepest agony and sorrow, floated through the air. Inquiry was made, but no one had been seen near the house at the time, though several persons distinctly heard the weird, unearthly cry, and a terror fell upon the household, as if some supernatural influence had overshadowed them. Next day, it so happened that the gentleman and his eldest son went out boating. As they did not return, however, at the usual time for dinner, some alarm was excited, and messengers were sent down to the shore to look for them. But no tidings came until, precisely at the exact hour of the night when the spirit cry had been heard the previous evening, a crowd of men were seen approaching the house, bearing with them the dead bodies of the father and the son, who had both been drowned by the accidental upsetting of the boat, within sight of land, not near enough for any help to reach them in time. Thus the Banshee, and I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation, it means banshee. Thus the banshee had fulfilled her mission of doom, after which she disappeared, and the cry of the spirit of death was heard no more. While Johnson might not have been Irish, he was gifted with a powerful voice. A superstitious person could surmise that, in invoking the ancient spirit of the banshee haunting his Irish neighbors, the mischievous barber of Dutch Kills might have unleashed its fatal foresight on himself, leaving him drowned in the waters of Bowery Bay only 5 months later. And that tragedy survives in some form to this day in the legends and lore of Long Island.